I'm so happy to have this next guest back on the show. A lot of you know him because one of our platforms where our show broadcasts weekly is on the Hannibal TV, but this is a tremendously talented, knowledgeable mixed martial artist, commentator, fighter, decorated Greco-Roman wrestler, and one of the most popular podcast stars and hosts on YouTube for professional wrestling. The guy's fought MMA. The guy knows combat sports, and we're talking about none other than Hannibal himself, Mr. Devin Hannibal Nicholson. Welcome back to the show, brother.
Thank you, and thank you for streaming the show on the Hannibal TV Facebook page and YouTube channel. We get a lot of great feedback on your interviews.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and it's our pleasure. It really is. You know, we've had some of your people jump in and give us a lot of support. And then once in a while, the other way, we have some people jumping in saying, "Why isn't Hannibal hosting this? Who is this?" You know, and then or someone says, one person said, "Well, Hannibal can't host everything all the time, so we got these guys here." You know, so either way, we're happy to be part of it, and you know, really enjoy the work you do, man. You put in a lot of time on your channel. How long have you had the Hannibal TV on YouTube? About 7 years or something?
Yeah, since about 2016-ish, 15 or 16.
All right, about 5-6 years, and you've got like close to about 300,000 subscribers or something, right?
Yeah, and close to 200 million views. So we lose a lot. We don't have as many subscribers as our views actually show, because normally 200 million views, you'd have more subscribers, but some of our fans are off and on.
Yep, it makes sense. Well, you have some great wrestling interviews. I love when you have these guys from the 80s and 90s, man, because as a little bit of an older guy, I remember cheering for those guys. And I love the stories. In fact, I was just talking with Adam here prior to you getting on, that if you remember the nutrition as well as the knowledge about fitness, and then also, you know, steroids and other things weren't around so much before like the late 80s. And so in the early 80s and 70s, you had a lot of guys who probably looked like your dad at this point, right? They were big guys who didn't really look in shape. They didn't have a 6-pack or a 4-pack or a 2-pack, right? But they were brave as hell. They were tough as hell. They didn't have any steroids, so they weren't protected from any of the hard falls they took. And they just went in there and you know, competed in a dangerous sport. And what do you think? I mean, I think those guys, even though their bodies didn't look like it, a lot of those guys were very strong, rugged dudes, weren't they?
Yeah, and those guys would get attacked a lot more too by fans, because fans believed it more. So you'd have to be more legitimately tough in those days. And also, to break into wrestling, they wanted you to actually be tough in the past. So you would be, they would call it, they would stretch you.
Yep.
Which is basically what grappling is. Like the wrestlers actually knew how to do like no-gi grappling, and they would rough up the trainees for a long time before they actually started teaching them that it was more a performance than actual real wrestling.
Yeah.
And the ones that weren't tough, they would just beat the crap out of them. So they would go around town telling people they tried wrestling and they got beat up.
Yeah.
So it would make wrestling seem legitimate. But now all you have to do is pay money, and pretty much any wrestling school will train you.
Yeah, it's really different. It's not the same rugged guys that were in it back then, at least most of them. And, you know, I know that you've been an open supporter of pro wrestling, but also an open critic of a lot of the shows today. And, you know, it does seem like that excitement of the mid-late 80s through the early 2000s is just gone, and I think maybe a lot of it was because of the promoters just kind of losing the grip on, or losing the concept of what really worked in the late 80s and the 90s and really early 2000s. What would you say though is the biggest difference, and is there anything now with social media and with the appetite of the millennials being maybe different than Generation X and baby boomers, is there anything that could be done to change wrestling so that all of a sudden millions of people would want to tune in every Monday night or Tuesday night?
I think, from what I understand, like the median age of wrestling fans right now for WWE is 54 years old.
Oh, wow.
So most of the people still watching it are people that were fans of it in like the 80s and 70s and 90s and are still watching it just because they became fans then. But I don't think there's all that many young people watching it like there were. A lot of the young people are watching MMA instead. But I think what they really need is just a new Rock or a new Steve Austin or Hulk Hogan to come and make it popular again, because that's the real issue. They don't have any mega stars that transcend popular culture right now. John Cena was the last one, and I guess you could say Brock Lesnar was as well. Definitely. But Brock Lesnar wasn't to the level of Cena, but he did actually become UFC champion, and he is known to fans outside of wrestling. But Cena and Lesnar still didn't reach the popularity of The Rock or Hogan. So hopefully somebody like that will come along, and I think MMA actually needs that right now too.
Yes.
A new McGregor.
Yes, without a doubt. I think so too. Who of the big time pro wrestlers that passed away before you started your podcast and your show would you have loved to have interviewed? Like, the one thing I can picture is I would have loved to seen you do like an in-person interview with Andre the Giant, because you're a really big guy and he would be, what, 6 inches taller than you and like 200 pounds heavier than you?
Yeah. Him, and then I guess Macho Man and Roddy Piper come to mind.
Yeah.
As two that would have been good. I don't think Macho Man ever really did an out of character interview, because he saved his money well and made a lot of money and was in movies and stuff. So he didn't have to do the shoot interview circuit before he passed away, and he passed away pretty young.
Yes.
Piper did them, but I never got to do one with him because by the time I got into it, I think he passed away already, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I kind of just fell into this. I started posting matches on my channel, and then I had just done a few interviews here and there, but I noticed the interviews were getting a lot more views overall than the matches. So then I just decided to stick on the interviews. And by the way, for the MMA fans watching this, on top of the MMA Power Hour content that we have, I've also interviewed a lot of the UFC pioneers, because I was the biggest fan of UFC back in those days, of the Don Frys and the Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, Tito Ortiz's,
Tank Abbott.
I've even interviewed Randy Couture, Josh Barnett I did an interview with recently. I'm not as knowledgeable as you guys as far as like the current product. I don't follow it as closely as you guys do, but I love those legends. They seem to have more personality than a lot of the guys today. A lot of them are like lacking that character, like the Tank Abbott style character.
Yes, I agree. I really do agree. Those guys were just so great. The men you mentioned, and just so unique, man. I mean, Couture was just this upbeat, all-American dude everyone cheered for, bringing pretty much Greco-Roman wrestling in as his only game at first, and was brave enough to get in there and do that. And then, you know, you had Dan Severn actually at the same time, even earlier. Severn did that, just a good old big boy from Coldwater, Michigan, my original home state, doing his thing. And then you had Coleman. Then you had Don Fry with that great image, the Predator. I remember for a while they were calling Fry Magnum UFC because he had that mustache, like Tom Selleck in Magnum PI. And he was just great. And you've done great interviews with them. Babyface Assassin Josh Barnett, who then became the War Master. And yeah, you've definitely done great interviews, and you've had a few fights as well. Speaking of which, did you watch the interim heavyweight title fight this past Saturday in the UFC? Gane versus Derek Lewis.
Yes, and that Gon guy was actually he fought in this area a little bit before he went on to UFC. He was in the TKO promotion,
right, in Canada,
out of Montreal. So I was interested because when he came into the TKO promotion, he destroyed the guy that had been champion and was like considered fairly tough, and he just mopped the floor with this guy, and then
nice.
He was the champion of that promotion until COVID basically killed that company.
Yep.
But I was surprised that he's now the interim champion. He's definitely talented.
Yes. Would you be able to do an interview with him in French?
Probably, yeah.
Nice. And yeah,
yeah.
You know,
I hope he works on his English though, because I think he's very talented, but he's definitely to become that superstar in UFC. He's got to get a little bit better at his interviews.
Yes, that is true, because he's a really super nice guy, and when they follow him in the embedded, he's super fun and cool. He saw these shorts from Martin Lawrence, and he would remember watching the show and even gave a few of the lines that from an episode. But yeah, in the actual interviews, yeah, he's he could get more polished. But let me ask you one other thing I wanted to ask you about, and actually, let me ask you the other thing first, and then I'll come back to this. Pro wrestling, right? Pro wrestling. A lot of fighters are dying when they're your age or even younger. A lot of fighters are dying when they're older than you, when they're in their 40s, and then a ton of fighters are gone like by 50 or their mid 50s. A lot of people that are not in the industry, because you were in the pro wrestling industry, wrestling for several years, and you've been following it, commentating your own great organization, Great North Wrestling. What is it, man, without giving away any terrible secrets, although I guess they're kind of out, how the hell could such a high percentage of huge stars be dying so young? This depression because their careers or their steroids or their injuries? Or can you give me as clear an idea as you can about this terrible phenomenon, the fact that so many of our great stars are dead long before they were even retirement age?
It does seem that the average lifespan of a wrestler is 20 to 30 years less than your average human being, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
To live past 60 is pretty impressive.
Right. Hardly ever
for a wrestler, it seems, particularly from that 80s era. And I think, as you mentioned, that era and even into the 90s, they were working often 7 days a week for long stretches in a row. They were doing steroids, they were partying, they were taking pain medication so they wouldn't lose their jobs. A lot of the times, black market medication. There was the whole trial related to, at one point in the 80s, there was that Dr. Zahorian, or however you pronounce his name. He was actually in the dressing room. And I think it was in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where they went almost monthly, and he would just write them prescriptions for whatever they wanted.
Crazy.
So there was doctors like that all over the place, and eventually that catches up with you. And wrestling, as I've explained to people, yeah, you're not intentionally trying to hurt your opponent, but you're allowing yourself to take punishment that you wouldn't necessarily allow someone to do in normal life. Like in wrestling, if you get slapped in the face, that's pretty much real. If someone did that to you on the street, you'd fight them over that. But that adds up. Taking those chairs, I can tell you that hurts.
Oh yeah, it's the punishment is.
I've
real.
had my head split open a few times, both the back and the front of the head, from those heavy steel chairs.
Yeah,
and I've had a concussion from getting hit with a steel chair for about a week.
And that's not unusual, I've heard, right? It's like dangerous stunt work, pretty much, isn't it?
Yeah, you're performing stunts, and everyone works different styles. Some people, the more comedy wrestlers, obviously, aren't going to have as many injuries as like the guys like Chris Benoit, who were doing the hard hitting stuff.
Yeah.
And taking real shots to the head and so forth in an effort to make the matches look more legitimate. But it's a combination of everything, I think. But you don't hear about the ones that weren't known for steroids and drugs passing away young for the most part.
That's right.
Usually it's the ones that were into that stuff. The guys like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who, he was on steroids for a while, obviously, and he's admitted to taking speed and stuff. But that's another thing they used to do before they would wrestle.
Oh, wow.
Is to take speed. And then they would take downers to go to sleep. And then they'd have to get up for an early flight and take an upper again, then take a downer to sleep on the plane.
Yeah, I heard.
Take an upper to get off the plane to go work out.
Right. I heard that Elvis Presley kind of was doing that. A lot of people tried to feel that he was just this party animal in his early 40s. And in reality, I don't believe that. He was taking medicine to help him be able to do his shows. He was doing live shows 4 nights a week. And then to be able to deal with pain from flying and sitting and never being comfortable, and then to be able to get to sleep. And it's unfortunate. A lot of chemicals in the body. It's
even travel. Say you weren't wrestling, even if you had to travel every day like they were doing in the 80s and 90s, just from town to town. Don't even take into account wrestling. That would wear a person out.
Yeah, without a doubt. You know what it brings to mind? Remember the all-time classic hockey movie, Slapshot, with Paul Newman? Yeah. I love that. And they were like a minor league team, and they were taking buses from town to town. And it's funny because when they're taking buses from town to town, there was no cell phone. So you were playing cards or you're just talking trash with your teammates. That seemed kind of fun. But I could imagine even that, and a lot of times you weren't in the comfort of a big bus. It was just an uncomfortable plane ride, or these guys, some of them are driving from town to town. So tough life. Yeah. You know, we've got about 10 minutes left with you, Hannibal, and I want to use it wisely. So the fight you saw that we all saw this past Saturday with Gane versus Derek Lewis, it looks so different than the early MMA heavyweight fights. And you're a big heavyweight like these guys. In the early days, it was all about who was the better wrestler. He would take the fight to the ground and either submit the other guy or just ground and pound him. That still does happen, but it seems like in the heavyweight division of the UFC, pretty much all we have that has that skill is Stipe Miocic and Curtis Blades. And a lot of these other guys are not wrestlers. What is it with the heavyweights you think that is making this happen, and that kind of are creating, higher level fighters that are mostly strikers? And Gane, although he looked really slick, it wasn't the most fan friendly fight. You know what I mean? What's your thought about that fight?
They were booing at the end, and I don't think it was just because they didn't want him to be champion. I think it had to do with the fight itself.
Yeah, and is wrestling somehow not going to be effective anymore in MMA, in the heavyweight division? Is this kind of the new look of the heavyweight division for a while? And what's your thought about what you saw and the landscape in the UFC heavyweight division?
I'm surprised at the landscape. It's not the highest level of competition. I was actually surprised that he's the champion so quickly.
Right.
As he's only recently been in the UFC. But maybe it's just that the top level wrestlers aren't getting into it for whatever reason anymore. Like you hear Gable Stevenson that just won the Olympics and is an NCAA champion. He's probably signing with WWE. So maybe they're just getting offers elsewhere and they don't want to do MMA.
Just
so for whatever reason, the strikers are taken over at the moment.
Yeah, it makes sense. It may be the money, because there's still not enough money in MMA. What do you think, man? You're I think you made it by a couple years to be a millennial, I think, or you may have been the first year of millennials or something like that, second year, right? But I think you are.
I'm 38.
38. So you're not that old. And I think someone 41 or younger is a millennial, I think. So as a millennial guy, but one who's been, decorated in Greco-Roman wrestling and been involved for so many years, what do you think it's going to take for MMA fighters at a higher level to all be paid better? I mean, we see it with the guys that catch the public's attention, like Conor McGregor. We see the PFL and Bellator, especially PFL having $1 million for the winner of a tournament, though, but it's a winner of like an 8 or 16 man tournament where you got to win so many times. Will this change, do you think, anywhere in the next 5 years, or is it going to be more like 10 or 15 or 20 years by the time that there's enough money in MMA that the top guys from the Olympics want to come over and compete?
I find it weird at that McGregor press conference when Dana White said that they were making the performance bonuses $75,000 rather than $50,000 on that pay-per-view because it was a special pay-per-view. Then he said, well, it's not in the budget to make it permanently $75,000, even though they're highly profitable, and it's been $50,000 for over a decade now.
Yeah.
So what? The dollar is worth less, but the performance bonus is less. And I remember Nick Denis, former UFC fighter from this area. He had a very impressive first knockout and won the performance bonus when he made his debut about 10 years ago now. But he said if he didn't win the performance bonus that night, he would have actually hardly made anything because he had to pay for his own commission costs in that state, which was New Jersey. He had to fly in his team, and the pay was only like $12,000 or something at that time. So it's like if he didn't get that $50,000 bonus, he would have been screwed. So the pay is low. I mean, it seems like John Jones is really trying to fight that right now, but he's not having much success.
Right. Francis Ngannou also. That's why this interim title took place, because Francis was not happy. Sorry to cut you off if I did, but those are two good points. Another thing I just thought of, which makes perfect sense. A lot of UFC fighters, we got about 2 minutes left, 2 to 3 minutes, Hannibal, but a lot of MMA fighters that are like under 185 pounds don't really have options to go to WWE or wrestling. They're just too small, right? But the guys that are big have that option. Not all of them, but some. So it makes sense. If you're coming out of the Olympics with a medal and you're a heavyweight or even a light heavyweight or super heavyweight, whatever, you actually have that option. And it seems like because of that, a lot of them are saying no to MMA and yes to wrestling, whereas the smaller guys have no offer for wrestling. Vince is not going to take a guy 5'8" and 160 pounds to wrestle for him. So that actually makes sense, and I bet you that's probably why the pool is kind of not as deep as we'd wish it would be in heavyweight division, huh?
Yeah, because there's no guaranteed money in UFC, to my knowledge, right now. They might sign someone like Gable Stevenson to a better deal than your average person, but you wouldn't have a guaranteed pay like you would in WWE. And they do scout the NCAA tournaments now too. They have, I know it was Gerald Briscoe doing it for the longest time, but they are scouting the top heavyweights all the time. So who knows? But I think you're right. The pay has to go up because I interviewed this guy, but the guy that recently fought Jake Paul, I don't know why his name is slipping me.
Yeah, the guy just choked Jake Paul was, you mean Ben Askren?
Yeah, didn't he make more money for that fight than he ever did in MMA?
I think he said that. That. And although he was getting better paychecks than a lot of guys overseas and in the UFC, but I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, it's crazy, these the influencer fights, you know what I mean? they're definitely an interesting thing, and people are making money. I guess it's a good thing. It's unfortunate, though, that these influencers are not going to beat any boxers probably in the top 30. Yet a lot of the boxers in the top 30 are fighting for $5,000. These influencers are getting $1 million. But I guess that's kind of how it is, and how it's been most of your life, right? At least adult life, is social media is a big thing. So speaking about that, in the last minute we have you, let us know where people can find Hannibal TV. For people watching this, I know you're watching it, so he doesn't have to tell you, but on Fight TV, people are watching this, Facebook, everywhere. Let us know the best place people can follow you, and maybe if you have any scheduled interviews, if they're not a secret, let us know what people can look forward to.
Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Hannibal TV, and YouTube at the Hannibal TV, and all the links are at thehannibaltv.com. And we actually have our first Great North Wrestling event here in Ontario post-COVID on August the 28th in Kingston, Ontario, and all the information on that is at thehannibaltv.com. So check it out, and check out all of our MMA interviews. I just released a compilation video of people, MMA legends, talking about Tito Ortiz today. So check that out.
Without a doubt, love to see it, man. Love to see your interviews. One thing you and I both know is we got to listen to the guest. Let them be the star of the segment, and that makes the fans happy. And so you and me, birds of a feather. Big respect to you, Devin Hannibal Nicholson. Appreciate you a lot, brother.
Thanks a lot, sir. See you next time.
Absolutely.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Support us on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our full shoot interviews ad-free and help our channel grow. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.